Welcome. Thanks for joining me on this draw-along session on the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, France. The next hour, we're going to draw in perspective a three-dimensional image of the Arc de Triomphe de l'Étoile, the star in French, meaning that it's set in a 12-point star on the axis of the Champs-Élysées. So before we get too far along, I hope you had a chance to check out the Viking.TV excerpt on how to draw in perspective using a small box that we recorded earlier for you. And I hope you also had a chance to print out the base sheet for the Arc de Triomphe so that you know how to scale an image we're going to draw from and follow me with perspective on that page. Because we've got a little bit of a scientific dilemma here, is that we've got 2 dimensions to work with, and we want to try to put 3 dimensions on that piece of paper. So that's what we do with the mechanics of perspective, an ancient art form to create that illusion, kind of lost in the Middle Ages and rediscovered in the Renaissance. And so since then, it's been employed to create that illusion of 3-dimensional space on a 2-dimensional platen. So our subject is the Arc de Triomphe. There are many arches like this around the world now. There's mostly preceded here. A lot afterwards. We'll talk about some modern versions of triumphal arches. But first we want to start with the idea of the arch itself and why that exists, because even though this is a French building by Chalgrin for Napoleon, it really is a Roman idea. So the classical condition in terms of architectural structure is there's a ground plane. So this will be just a light sketch you can put on the side if you're interested. And from that ground plane, typically what happens is you have to build 2 vertical struts to create space for man to live in, so to speak. That's the primitive hut, goes way back when the man finally left the cave and found, after a storm, some tree trunks that were still there close to each other, took the branches and created the horizontal member, the beam, so to speak, over that, and so shelter was created. So that was the sort of paradigm of architecture for tens of thousands of years, where you had vertical members, and then the length of this in timber would work okay because it spans a distance fairly well. In stone, it doesn't do so well. So in the stone language of the classical idea of Greek and Roman architecture, there would have to be multiple columns to create a span that would hold stone architecture above it, because stone doesn't have much tensile strength to it, meaning that when the force comes down, it would snap that configuration. So imagine a rubber band, if you pull it in direction and then let it go, it comes back and still has its original form to it. If I took something that was more of a mass like a stone and I broke the stone or stretched the stone, it would fail. So the idea in this compressive strength, where you're trying to put all the weight on the stone itself, the Romans then eventually designed a type of architecture that created more possibilities in plan and elevation. And that was to introduce not just square language, like we did here, but also circular language. So if this has trouble in its height to span there, and you want more height between there and less architecture, they said, why not put a circle that would float from the earth and come up to the points of the connection of the columns and the beam across there. So that now small bits of architecture then, pieces that would be built up, then take the load along the sides and push it down towards the edge columns themselves. So the Roman arch was then born out hundreds of years before the birth of Christ, and then through the language of all Western and Eastern cultures ever since then, in varying degrees of conditions and purpose, but certainly an avenue to eliminate the structural need and expand space and the breadth of things there. So that, for instance, from our point of view, might be a pattern for your front door with some side lights and maybe a glass panel up above, so it would free up a foyer place for you. Or in the case of today's sketch, if that's the size of you at the front door, the circle would be in the middle of its own square, and that square is urban scale. And all of a sudden a person is about this tall adjacent to it. And that's the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, as well as many triumphal arches across the world now. So what we're going to take a look at then is a spectacle that really is there for the glory of the military and the people that gave their lives for the French Revolution first in 1789, and eventually the Napoleonic victories against other European enemies at the time. So his promise then was to build this as part of a graphic ending point for how Paris was growing rapidly in the 19th century, where she really left her medieval background behind when Baron Haussmann came in and did a new urban planning scheme to expand and modernize the city. So that really we'll do with a quick diagram up here along this axis, and we'll use that center point of the arch here kind of as a diagram for us. So if this is the east of Paris, where the river flows from the mountains and it ends up in the sea coming west all the way through it, our starting point is a U-shaped open palace that you know of as the Louvre there, which was the home to the kings of France for centuries and now is one of the largest museums in the world. And from that, Paris grew to the west along the Garden of the Tuileries from the Renaissance on to the Place de la Concorde in the Bourbon realm, to the Champs-Élysées, and then out to a point where new development was going to happen. And so they realized that that's a ceremonial point to kind of create that language of growth out to the west of Paris, this being east again and this being west. Now to make that magnificent idea in plan type as well as in verticality here, the architect who worked on the planning scheme, the planner Haussmann worked with Hittorf, the architect, and devised a way to say, at this point, we will have a circle and plan for the city of Paris, an enormous circle that will have 12 stations, just like a clock, of boulevards all convening on this one place in Paris. So it puts an enormous amount of energy for all these boulevards to meet in one point, and what better than have a triumphal arch for Napoleonic armies and the liberty yourself from the revolution in 1789. So that means there has to be something fairly important. Why not look to history? And for instance, the Romans who developed this is Trajan's arch in Ancona, Italy, to mark one of his victories there. There are arches throughout the Roman Forum in Rome to this day that are standing. There are arches around the world for other military might by local armies. And so this is Napoleon's way to historically then connect his realm as a leader with the Roman leadership too, which is probably noted as the single most powerful army force in the history of Western civilization, and he's going to tie his name to it by doing a triumphal arch. So you can see here that in its elevation type, we've got the one circle up above, and it comes down and then kisses a second circle beneath it. And at this point is what's called the spring point of the arch, so we drop down into the columns, and that's the shape of the triumphal arch itself, and the rest is centering that into a box to show the actual height and breadth of the arch itself. So we'll sketch that in perspective, but that's kind of the diagrammatic idea that shows the ideas of how this grows in terms of its language and have this enormous scale to it. Again, from the individual at a door front to somebody walking under that arch today in the west side of Paris. So what we do for perspective now is we take the flat two-dimensional length and width. We still see that. Here's the width of it, here's the height of it. But now we're going to see that as if we're walking around that. So in our photograph over here, we're on the western edge of it. So we're going to see around to the left. It's actually on a bit of a summit. So down here's the Champs-Élysées going back to the Louvre Museum. And here's the edge of one ring of Hittorf's architecture, which follows around here. When there isn't a boulevard, there's housing. So the fabric of Baron Haussmann's city of Paris opens up to this enormous ring road of traffic around here daily, and the pedestrians typically access this subterraneanly by going underground and popping up under the arch beneath it. So we want to make it seem more three-dimensional, just like the photograph does, so we have to take the idea of a cube in space, something orthogonal, and make that follow the rules of perspective. And that's got 1, 2, and 3. If you've gone through that 10-minute perspective warm-up on Viking.TV, you first know that there has to be a horizon line. And so at eye height of somebody walking by it, it's way down here at the base like I drew there, the size of a person, standing on the property of the center of that great 12-point star in the city of Paris. And then from there, you find the vanishing point. So we can put a person who's close to it on the site at the base. We can put somebody closer to us, which means they'd still have the same head height, but since they're closer to us, their head would be larger, and then their body is kind of at that height. So now they're across the street, ready to risk their life with the traffic there ripping around the base of it to get closer to the arch itself. So there's our horizon line. We've set up some perspective there. In this case, the box itself needs to have the ability to take horizontal lines, do a shift in your scientific knowledge about parallel. You've learned since grade school that parallel lines simply never meet in space. So the top and the bottom are parallel to each other. They're going to go out in space forever and simply never meet. In the mechanics of perspective drawing, they do meet at one point on the right side and then another point on the left side. Depending on how you view it in perspective, are you viewing it with a little bit of the left side showing, a lot of the left side showing, most of the left side showing, and so by doing that, you're changing where the points are on the horizon line. So for our reference, when we draw the corner of the box here and give you your tick marks where you started with, this left side is rushing back to a point over here on our horizon line, and the bottom of it is going to rush up to that point. So any horizontal line on the left side of this box, or even on the inside of the arch, which is horizontal, parallel to these, all has to go back to that one point. And that's what controls it. It makes it look three-dimensional on the sheet of paper, because we've only got 2 dimensions to work with. So this system allows it to seem like it's three-dimensional. The other point's more difficult because it's still going to be there on the horizon line, but because we're so close to fill up more stuff we can draw with on the paper, it's going to be well off the page to the right. So you have to remember, if anything is parallel to each other coming this way to the right, we have to remember they can't be parallel to each other here. They're actually converging to a point. So imagine somebody holding a series of balloons horizontally. They're holding all those strings together over to the right over here, but they're all flaring out to the balloons as they go further and further away. So it's kind of a diagram of how all these horizontal lines, for instance, this one that comes up, the tick mark hits, it goes over from the spring point, and it's going to meet these points. In my sketch, probably about another piece of paper off the page over here. So just bear in mind, you know they're parallel in one part of your brain, but you're going to draw it artistically as if they're not physically going to be parallel, because that dimension now is more than this dimension because of perspective. That dimension is more if you measure that down to there, because we're contorting it for the sake of perspective. The last thing we're going to do is work with value. And that's where I wanted you to engage when Viking.TV told you to buy a certain supply, because a regular pencil is a great place to start, but it doesn't give you full value if it's 2H or one you pull out of your drawer or you kind of take notes with, because it really doesn't go to black. If you buy a media that's like a color pencil brand, in this case mine is Prismacolor, they're all the same, but they have a little bit of wax in them, and the patina for the actual black goes really jet black. Because we need to go from, in value, the paper, which has no percent value, it is just white, all the way to 100% black, and your normal pencil will get you to maybe 60% gray. If you want how the human eye sees, we see in black and white, and we love the relationship between those tones in this black and white photograph. So if you squint down, so you can barely see this image of the Arc de Triomphe, there's jet black here, and there's page white there, adjacent to each other. And that's what's going to make it look as three-dimensional to complement the horizon line and vanishing point. So our first job here is simply going to look at the mechanics of this and finish the global idea of the form itself. Lucky for us, when we sketch architecture, it's very orthogonal. It's on the axis of X, Y, and Z, and a lot of times it's always set up on a grid in a city. So the rules are really simple as opposed to human nature, the language of the body, or lifelike things, or flora and fauna. Architecture is really rigid, so it's simple for us. So we have the left side coming back, we have the right side going over. It's stone, so it's not transparent except for the arch itself. So we come over here, and we've got a series of vertical lines that all rush up. Now, to add to this, we're going to change that language of just 2 points for this sketch, because when you come to an object and it's in the distance, the 2 points dominate. If you keep it like this and you walk up close to it, like we are in this photograph, there's a third point you use, because all perspective actually is 3 points, but usually the 2 points dominate. So the third point is negligible. In this case, you can see it happening because what happens is the verticals, which are also parallel to each other, are actually going to converge on a point well off the paper here, not on the horizon line, because the horizon line is for horizontals only. The vertical is, if you cant those in towards each other, it's going to pinch them in because as you walk closer, nature converges that because your eye is a small apricot-sized ball, and so top and bottom, left and right on your eye, it's converging back to the plane of your brain, how you see that as a picture that's flat on as an image in your brain. So in this case, we want to tilt in the verticals a bit. So each vertical we're going to draw along the way is going to have to hypothetically get to a point in the page way up here. And as long as you're knowledgeable to that, you'll realize you're never going to be able to go just perfectly true up and down. You want to kind of cant those in as well. Okay, so we had our idea of how this is going to be a circle on top of a circle, so that gives us the base down to here. And then there's sort of a thickness to it, as you see here. And then what happens is there's also a secondary arch that runs north-south through the arch. So if you're on this side of it, there's a bit of a baby triumphal arch on this wing, and it cuts through and comes down to the grade over here. And from the grade back to our left point, we now have a void that goes out toward the south of Paris and a void that goes out to the north. On this side, coming off the right vanishing point, we only see a little glimpse of it. It's like a little quick line, and we see the edge of that. So it's not prominent on this side. We see more of it on the inside of the arch there. So you get a sense of it right here. As you look in here, you see the arch. And then here you see the outside of the arch. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of play with the surroundings because every featured building wants to know its place and the idea of it. In this case, because this is so pulled off and the place around it is so enormous, they've taken the density of Paris and really flared out to make sure when you come to this site, it's all about the arch. It's not placed like a medieval building inside the fabric of Paris. They built a fabric of Paris for the arch and then put Hittorf's thing to scale. It still is a 5 or 6 story building over here, but that's the size of it relative to the Arc de Triomphe. And it's not our subject, so we're just going to give it sort of a little shape, some of the trees in front of it for now, and the same trees that are on the boulevard going down will start beneath our horizon line and cascade down to the point there. Behind them is more of this architecture, but we don't see it because of the trees. So that's the Champs-Élysées chasing back to the Louvre Museum through the Tuileries to the east. This actually traces right through the arch. And if I continue this down here about, a mile and a half, it will actually arrive at another arch. And that arch was done in the 80s on a international competition won by a Danish architect. And he built the Tête de France arch. So Arch de la Tête, the Tête is the sort of head of the city where the new business city was built out. And so what he did, he'd build an office tower that's got 2 towers on both sides, an enormous plinth of stairs that walks up, an observatory at the top. And that was going to receive the movement of this across the entire spine that runs some 4 or 5 miles from the west side of Paris right to central Paris and the Louvre. So that's how in the 1980s they sort of completed that axis, and he left it open because it goes off then and you see the sunset behind it on the furthest western axis. So it's not a terminus, it's just one more way to kind of house the arch within an arch in the distance. And the one thing that happened over the play of time, because the Louvre wasn't part of the urban planning scheme, it was just an enormous chateau on the River Seine snaking by on the south side of it. So its axis isn't true to this east-west like the Tuileries, Arc de Triomphe, and this is. It's off 5 degrees. So they missed that in planning to have that perfect axis the whole way. So what on this end, the axis goes out and is kept. What the Danish architect did was shift this 5 degrees in the opposite direction to receive it. So in a sense, this is 5 degrees off that way. And that way the two ideas are kind of bracketed there. And the way this is picked up at its 5 degree erroneous point, if you went on the true axis, right where it hits that point and meets together is an equestrian statue of Louis XIV. So it all makes sense in this. So you go through a time channel of the history of Paris to go from the courtyard of the Louvre to Ayampe's glass pyramid to the Tuileries to Place de la Concorde, the Revolution, all the way up the Champs-Élysées to the Arc de Triomphe, and then out to contemporary Paris at La Défense to go up the Tête in a glass-tubed elevator inside the box itself. So our job now is to build the other side of it, and we kind of build it at a higher scape because now the circle's coming around, and so this height is building up as we come over here, so it's a little bit taller on this side. Again, those trees will hide the architecture behind it, so we're going to give a quick value just to realize that that's not architecture, that's the architecture of nature. And then she runs through in the middle here as well. So we see that continuum. And it comes to the other side. So that'll give us some idea of shaping the scale of the site around here, because once we start to put people in, you'll see just how large this monument is to the revolutionary forces and then Napoleon's army. So now our next idea is to work with light, shade, and shadow, because we've got our box kind of established here. And so basically when we draw in perspective and want to use light, the light comes down on one surface strongest, so that's the light side of my hand. On the underside is going to be a darker colored skin because it's not receiving light, and then it casts a shadow. So that's the value, light, shade, and shadow. So in this particular view shed, we see the light on the west side as the sun sets to the west of the axis here. And then on this side, it faces north, so it's not receiving light. So we can simply come in kind of on the edge of the pencil and kind of gray this out. And now, because this is cut on the inside, there's no western light lighting up the inside of the arch here. So once we come to the edge of this part of the arch, it's got some detail all the way around it. So we see the face of the arch come down. The whole underside of the vault then, and that's what the language is for architectural design. Once you take an arch and you push it back in space, if I did sort of an axonomic projection, and did another arch, and another arch, and another arch, it creates a vault. And so that's how that shaped not only the Roman image of the face of architecture, but also the spatial architecture behind it. So you could create a great indoor space that's much wider than typical architecture because you're using the power of an arch three-dimensionally. So that pushes this back and gives us the depth of this vault now on the underside, you see, carried it back a certain distance. And so that gives us this shape where the sky comes in. We see the profile of the top of the entablature here, and that runs down to grade. Now there are segments to this where it's announcing the arch has this structural prowess, so architects want to talk about what's literally happening. This is actually just pure compression, and it rises up like any type of timber would have done in a structure supporting a lintel or a beam before. But now because it has a spring point, you celebrate that with more detail at that height. You're making this idea of the arch have more of an awareness in the design of objects by celebrating it with sort of a small cornice line. We're an important line now for the demarcation of something springing from that. That rises up, we come to the top of the arch, and now we crown it with more detail at this point, because now we're celebrating the most important part of the arch, and that's the very centerpiece, which is its keystone. Because of all the pieces that go in there to make the support of this growing up, that piece right there is the most important piece of stone, because without the key, the rest of the arch falls apart. And so that's the most celebrated and typically given more definition and detail there. So that box is out, and then we've got a long piece of detail that runs up here, and that starts to build toward the language of archaeological detail. It could be scripts, it could be a pictograph, whatever it is where you travel and see Roman arches. There's ways to tell stories graphically on them. So that when it comes, it runs around the corner, and so there's different segments that take us up. And then there's another break line in terms of sort of finishing the building until it comes to its hat above that. And in this case, that has a little fenced area off, a decorative fence, because what it's designed to be is not just a symbol, but it's also a view to get above Paris and see Paris from about 12 stories above, to look down the axis and see a nice view of it. So when you come to Paris, you walk in the subterranean way to get to this point, and then you can purchase your ticket to make your ascent either by stair or by the elevator, which take you to the top. So at the top here is that decorative ornament. We see here's wrought iron up here to protect the people that are up top. And then there's a cadence of different types of details that are broken out. There's 4 or 5, so we go in the center of them. They create that kind of armature so that we have sort of a hat then and a finish point to it. So now we've been sketching for maybe 15, 18 minutes, and we've got sort of that 15, 18-minute sketch. The process of this is, if you're doing this, you're doodling, and you can call that a drawing too. But if you spend more time to make something look more like the aspect, we could stop now and say, here's a 15-minute sketch of, and a lot of people would know, oh, that's the Arc de Triomphe. I've seen pictures of that, nice sketch. But if you want to spend more time, an hour together, by the time we're done, we'll have something that completes as much as you probably can do in a sketch. The next step after that is probably going to be a drawing where you spend maybe 4 to 8 hours on it. You do much more finite detail on it. And so you're more precarious about the profiles and the details of things. After that, if you spend more than 4 or 8 hours, then you're doing a rendering. It's for a presentation. It's more photographic-like. So really the time you're allowing is what you're trying to commit to, so that when you're done with your time, you're done with what you're trying to do. And that some trouble that you have with some people when they draw is they'll start over here and they'll start drawing things to a certain point, and it's so detailed because they can see it well that eventually they've committed to so much time to do that much information over here as well. When you sketch, you tend to do the whole thing once, the whole thing again, and keep doing it over and over again. Then time runs out. That's the amount of time sketch this is for. And so you've accomplished your task with you in control, rather than your drawing ability controlling you and saying, I need 6 hours to do just what I think is the right type of sketch. So the next thing we're going to do is kind of build in the next biggest feature for us, and that is when you're looking up, you're actually looking up toward that sky plane, and the sky plane is going to be a great feature for us because it's not the fact that the sky is a white blanket all the time. The sky is a great feature to make your form look more three-dimensional. And so what we're going to look at here is the depth of clouds moving in the back, where they really are the same scale cloud in formation, but they seem larger and larger and larger as they come closer to us above us. And that helps the sky be horizontal. It's a flat plane going back in perspective rather than a plane that's just one color behind the building. So what we want to do is sort of emulate this in kind of a sketch type of way and show, it doesn't have to be towards perspective either, because the sky is on its own operating system. We're going to simply put in, at a little bit more of an inclination, some lines that show there's a pattern here, and it gets tighter in the distance. As we move it towards us, it's the same cloud pattern, but it's getting further and further and broader apart. And we'll bring some of this to cover up some of our doodles over here on the right. And so now it seems like, even with those lines, it seems like it's a blanket that's above us rather than something that's a wall in front of us. And so if we go really further distance, we can really tighten that up way down here and show that movement. So what we want to do then is use some of that, because there's some dark regions that will move on the edge of the building. So rather than just simply make it monochromatic, we're kind of going to go every other one and go on the side of the pencil and just wash some of your value right up to the building. It doesn't have to be terribly neat, but we want to sort of make it monolithic, so the stroke kind of disappears and all we see really is the value. And we'll come over here and do this one. And that'll kind of eliminate the detail, these graphics over here on the right. What's most important is you want to carry this path through over to this edge, so it's continuous and seems like it's part of the sky. This one will break through here and be there, and then continue out over here a little bit in the distance. Then the same thing happens really quickly down there. That's the same amount of sky in cloud form. And down here it's just a series of lines in the distance that'll cover over that. To give it more body, we can come at the base of the blue where it'll appear darker next to a cloud formation next to it and do the lower third of it a little bit darker and run that up to the building, the lower third of it there, the lower third of it there. And again, any kind of formation like this is successful because the sketch isn't about the sky, it's about the Arc de Triomphe, and so we're just trying to promote its value coming off the page here. Okay, we'll do a little bit on the ground plane here, and I made this so big we're kind of crunching down how much information. But basically, because that's our eye height, we want to make sure we get in the roundness of this place that kind of kicks up. It's going to be a high point at the edge and then drop back around. And we're not going to see it curl back here. But we want to get that in because we want to make the base here a darker tone than the architecture. So you can see everything right up here at the plinth is going to be white and stone. So we need to come back on either side of our person and kind of make this bottom inch or so a nice dark tone of asphalt, which is a darker tone than what's lighting up the stone for the Arc de Triomphe, as that wraps around it. Through the side of the side. And that'll kind of give us a base because we want to take all the mass of this and have it be held by something vertical so there's earth beneath it. Otherwise it would just wash out to the white of the paper and become two-dimensional down here. So the base is really important to us. Okay, now we can kind of step into the building and our sort of next couple of minutes here, and we'll come to a halfway point where we establish all the information we need. This is going to be tricky because, for instance, these are enormous plateaus of sculpture that are three-dimensional coming out of the stonework there. There are significant pieces of battles or stories there that are telling a significant part, whether Napoleonic or French Revolution cases to it. We don't have time or we don't have the ability to actually be realistic there. If that intrigues you, get closer to it and make that your sketch. But now we have to have sort of just a diagram for it. So sort of right beneath us, at the head of both, there's going to be a featured person that leads the part there. And so we can come to that point and just show the animation of that coming down to a certain point on both sides. And then it stops and is held by a plinth. And that plinth steps around. It sort of ends up being the foot of the structure for us on both sides. So we'll do a twin over here. And it'll just be suggestive and show the idea that we know it's three-dimensional sculpture and it's got a great artistic piece of prose in French history, but it's not our subject per se. The whole building's our subject, the whole monument. Okay, now we'll come in and we'll show that not only is the underside of the barrel vault going back, that this whole inside doesn't receive light. And that gets truncated by that inner face. And then darker than the stone there is inside here. There's enough artistic decoration on that drum of the barrel vault going this way between the two legs that this is even a deeper gray than what we started with on the inside skin of the barrel vault. And that'll hold that for now. And then we'll come back into our vegetation. We'll come to the lower third of it, and we'll articulate the base of those moving around. Because the light that's at top is laying the top of the urban plan trees, and the bottom third then has shadow cast on it from the trees above, so the lower third gets a second dose of our value. So now we're set up with all of our iconic imagery of what we want to complete in the sketch, because we want to set up a couple of people right here close to us. They're like close to us because there's no object between us and the object. So we'll put sort of an artificial object of a couple of people on their sojourn trying to cross above ground, which is a bit harrowing because there are no stoplights on the whole ring here, so that you sort of take your life in your hand, because every one of the 12 streets, the cars coming off the 12 streets have the right-of-way, and so traffic coming from the left that circles around is always stopping for the next increment around that 12-sided étoile. So this is part of our foreground to get people to move over there, that same height we'll have people, and we'll build up our base of people congregating here, because there's always, throughout the night, through, of course, all the day, in the early morning, there's always people congregated around this great monument in Western Paris. Okay, so we're now halfway through our work here on this, and we'll try to build this up now, as I mentioned before, as the whole sketch comes out at once. We don't want to simply focus on this for 10 minutes and finish it, because then we're not in control of what we have time for here. And right now our time with the Viking.TV series is kind of about 50 or 60 minutes to complete these things, because we're trying to impress upon the audience that this language of drawing while you're listening will create such an impact on you understanding the subject, more than you can do by watching a show, reading about it, even traveling to it and just taking a picture and leaving. Now that you're taking the process of left brain, right brain, from your brain to your eyes, into your arm, to your pencil point, onto the paper, drawing the content, it's going to stay with you at a 90% rate the rest of your life. You'll be able to retain this drawing without seeing it 15 years from now, because you've been through this process, and it's an incredible encoding system that goes through with the art of drawing. So our next ability here now is start to take the value up, because right now it seems like if you squint and barely see your image, it's basically a white piece of paper with a lot of line work on it. We need more body in our value here, and so we're simply going to repeat the process and come over on the shade side and heighten up the value. Importantly, where it comes to the edge of hitting the white, it's stronger at that actual crowning element where it transfers from white to dark, and it's a little bit lighter towards the rest of the dark there. Same is true here. We're going to go darker at this right edge at the corner. There's a horizontal line in there. We're going to go darker towards this front edge here. So this is really crisp here. It's kind of a neutral gray there, and then less again towards the back edge. And we'll come to that in a second too, how we complete that back edge. Down here on this side, we have the little bit of the slit of this archway coming through at that height. So that'll certainly be darker in there. Then it receives some light bouncing around, so it becomes light as it drops to the ground. But then that whole side becomes darker when it meets the right front. Right on this edge, that whole edge is nice and crisp. So we're trying to move to 50 and 60% grays now to pull this off the page. So then we'll start at the top of our vault that goes back, make a nice edge to start with. And now the strongest dark is against the white of the sky behind it. We want it to go sort of a neutral gray in the middle, and another dark at the front edge of the white that skins it in terms of the detail of that. So very bold here on this section, edging it right toward that line we just drew, and then kind of faded away so it's a little bit lights bouncing around and animating that a bit. And it becomes darker right towards this edge again, up at the top. And then certainly more at the top third of the arch than at the bottom third of it, because we want that to kind of bleed now and move down here in terms of value. Stronger and becomes brighter as it comes down. That edge will be strong right by looking through to the east in Paris. And it'll come to the little rim of some of the highlighted detail on the vault that goes this way now. And now the top of that vault going that way we see is probably the least amount of light. So it's very dark there, and then trails down and becomes more operative and brighter towards the base. And we'll see one little cut line here that shows it's a flat level taking you through to that side of the arch. So now it's all brilliant white here, so now we need to push the sky against that. So we're going to start with this side of it as the edge of our profile. We're simply going to push the sky right up to it a little bit darker. We want the stone to be darker than that part of the blue sky, than that part. So we're taking the white of the sky before, we're pushing it to maybe a 20% gray next to the building. And that edge is going to be important to us when we finish that up in a couple minutes here. And now the top of it's really important because we're looking up at it. We're looking out, but obviously your eyes go to the glaze to the top of the building. So we need to now move to the value of this blue up here. And because it's the same blue down here, the blue of the sky during the day is always darkest right above you because the Earth's atmosphere kind of has enough pollutants and debris in it that it lightens up the value of any color. It's the thinnest amount when you look straight up to it because you're not looking through a lot of atmosphere. So our same pattern up here will be a little more pressure, maybe a 30 or 40%. So we wrap it up to the top crowning element of the arch because we want that white to play off against a nice value up there. And then we move this over to this side, and we come over on the right side, and because that's failing off to the right, we can eliminate the connection between this white and that white by edging that and making it a little bit darker through our sketches over here. And now we're going to come to our next point, which is hopefully you had a series of these. I usually have 5 or 6 per sketch. I work through, and I'll end up having a blunt one at the end for wash work. But I still have to have a couple of fine ones to get to our next point, which is the definition of the building in terms of edges. And that is basically when you sketch on a two-dimensional aspect, you can work with obviously the horizon line, the vanishing point, and then your value. But then you also want to work with the different types of lines that are seen in sketching. And they're the lines that form the space of the building. But this is a type of line that's in the front of us, and it really doesn't hide volume behind it. I can't push this pencil behind that either way. So it's significant, but it's not as significant as this one. It's the twin to it behind it. But I can push in space now in this sketch. I can get behind it with the pencil. If it does that, that has to be a more prominent line with its backdrop than the one in the foreground. So if you differentiate that across your sketch on all sides of it, that one type of line is bolder than the other, that gives us a starting point to finish our value for the rest of the sketch. So for instance, the top here is very strong, almost an 80% black, maybe even 90%. And it starts to show the profile of the classical order here. And that profile, if I do another sketch, I'll put over on this side, the profile is based on not just the whim of idea of architecture, but it's based on the human figure. That our face, our visage, basically has a forehead to it, and it comes down, and there's an eyebrow which protects your eye. Then the eye is inset, and your nose comes over, and then it projects out to protect your nostrils. So that's a working system, a technical system. Then you have your upper lip protecting your mouth, and the lower lip then works into the chin to protect and have voice. So your method of sight, sound, and oral communication is protected by the visage of your space. So classical language thinks of that as architecture, where there's a frontal piece that goes out and protects the skin. Then comes down, another piece comes over and protects that, and it keeps stepping back and works like a visage of the human form in the classical language. So we'll take that down to the ground, and we simply then, because this is a little delicate iron detail, we'll sort of make that just a darker stroke and make it a little bumpier up there as the iron goes up and down to protect people as a railing up there. And then wraps around and does the same thing on this side. So it's got the projection, and then down, it comes to the more prominent part of that projection, classical language, comes down, and let it go really dark now because we're going to push value into it in a little bit. And the detail of the sculpture gallery all the way down to the ground, and finally a grade. Same is true here. We look through that, and now this edge of this side of it also has a prominent profile. Bring that down, step it out and down. Here, around, down, and make that nice crisp line. So if it becomes too dull, you got to shift to another pre-sharpened pencil here. And so now we've got our language now in terms of our subject. You can see it's kind of pulling off the page now. I kind of popped it with the black there because it takes enough percentage of that 100% black to really get us to believe that we're going to have this illusion of a three-dimensional object on a two-dimensional piece of paper. So the next step here now is to eliminate the idea that vast difference of too much black by itself. We're going to come and take the body of the sky we had, and we're going to push it to a darker value adjacent to that black. And just keep washing it in so it's a little bit stronger right at that point. Even at some point it looks like a storm cloud there because we know Paris has its share of storms as well. And now we'll push the same thing there where that gray before is going to become more pronounced when it reaches that side of the building. More pronounced on the underside of this when it reaches this side of the building. Perhaps even this white here, which used to be a cloud by itself, could be a little more ethereal with grays and tones here, and it gets stronger right when it comes to the side of the building. Then we'll push it through so that it's stronger here, and it'll pick up on this side and be a little bit stronger at the base, coming off of that black line. There's another sort of, not converse way, but sort of interesting way to approach this problem because we were basically given paper which is typically white. You can start with 50% paper. You can get gray paper, a variety of different colors, but gray is really nice for this media. And so you push to your blacks again, and all of a sudden you've lost your highlights. That's when you buy white Conti crayons, and instead of doing blacks as your highlights, you pick out, because they're already there in the paper, you pick out your highlights in white, and so you'd create this all out of a white stroke. And so you can see that online if you look at drawing on charcoal colored paper or gray stock and see how people use this same media but also use a white pencil as well. So it's the same amount of time because either you start with all white, start with all gray, you've got the same amount of work in front of you. Okay, so we've got a little bit of detail over to make this housing. We can make the top level just grayed out, and then we're just going to go to the levels of it and quickly chip in little ideas of fenestration or windows that are all stacked up on each other. Paris has got a real rhythmic system. They did a really great job of coordinating housing typology for about 50 years there. And even to this day, it's really stringent in terms of what can be built and what the cadence of the architecture is. But once you establish that, it's going to kind of show the idea that if people understand it wraps around on all 12 points of this clock face, it's the same type of architecture that's pervasive. Maybe you could bring a little bit more value toward the sky here, all the way down to the horizon line. And now we'll do a little treatment to get some value into the sculpture area here. And so if you look at the detail there, it's not a whole lot that we can see this from this distance, but we can decide that the light's coming from this side. It'll cast more of a shadow on parts of the left. Maybe more leg work. There's always a horse or two involved during these furious sculptures to tell people about an important Napoleonic battle. Or on the other side is Liberty, coming after the revolution. And again, it's just a doodle that indicates that something at a different level of artistic prominence is happening on the skin. It's not a drawing of that. You're just simply going to stylize that. There's, on these breaks of classical language here, there'll always be a little bit of cast shadow. That's a little bit stronger, so we can go along that area and kind of strengthen those. Okay, now we're going to look at a test of how you can decide if how much more you want to complete in terms of value here. And here's where you shut down your eyes so you can't see your sketch, or you can't see the one that you're looking at. And then as you open them up, very little bit, you'll see the relationships of whites and darks. And if the white seems too prominent or the darks aren't strong enough, that's where you want to keep heading here to make this sort of pull off the backdrop there. So I'm going to assume that this white is really important against the gray over here. So I'm going to keep edging that relationship of when the white spanks off against it. But in the middle of it, it needs more attention to graying it out so that there's only highlights of white and not the entire subject. So we can then decide that the value of this, once it leaves its corner, could actually be more of the gray stone that it is. and temper it down so it's not so brilliant across the whole skin of it. Then let it go white against the edge. So we're simply going to go on the side of it again. It creates sort of an oblong face on the edge of your color pencil. And runs over to the edge here. This one we're going to run right to the edge because that's the sky beyond it. So if we kind of treat that as more of a gray me in the sky, it'll make that more pronounced of having us go through that. Even though it's white, sometimes you have to go against what you're thinking for the sake of the sketch. In this case is we need more concentration between values rather than just what we know as being the same color throughout. So I'm going to push that and encircle this white and make it really important compared to the arch itself. Because obviously we're here, what looks like for the building, but it wouldn't be an arch unless there was a void in it. So we want to make sure the void's the most important part. So here we come right up to this edge, all the way down to the ground, and we're going to make that more contrasting. Even though we don't see it in the photograph or when they're in person, you have to do things sometimes for the mechanics of this because we're handcuffed. We're working on a two-dimensional piece of paper. Okay, same is true over here. We're going to come to this edge. And right when it flips from the inside here to the out, I think that could be bolder. So we're going to come the dark and make that edge right up to there more prominently. And have it come down and be really exotically strong right here because that's the foot. That's where it hits the earth and it changes its direction. So I'm going to make that more prominent here as well. And then under the rotunda, which is probably the darkest part of the whole piece of paper at all, go back and just repeat what we did before and make it almost jet black there, right when it comes around and starts the arch. Because that's what we're here for, the arch becoming a barrel vault, pushed through space. Okay, now we're going to sort of animate this because there's always, again, lots of people at the base, so we'll come up with that piercing horizontal line there for eye height. And we'll just start to stagger in a series of forms. Just make sure that whether somebody's close, which is here in the large scale head, somebody is the same size as the far distance away, the head becomes smaller, but the proportion of the torso and the legs are the same. So you can simply put them in. What helps a lot if you put them in with partners and they're kind of standing next to each other in small crowds instead of just individuals. Then we can sort of build that in there as a foundation for just the scale of the project. Get a finer point here. I think we're getting pretty close now. And then you can vary the different types of clothing material, so not all the same kind of silhouettes. Some people could have dark tops and light bottoms, light tops and dark bottoms. So they're just really sort of scale forms in the distance, which again tells you the size about the arch. So we talked about how Rome created this featured idea for celebration and how Napoleon picks up on it generations later. In the 1980s then, yet again, another interpretation of that. And an American version, how our gateway to the West was, in a sense, another type of way to claim an idea in American history, and how this, out of structural steel and the elevator slash escalator on the inside, moves people through it for a vista, is a great grand arch between the East and West of the United States. So they're abound everywhere. For those of you who've been to New York, Washington Square, obviously there's a triumphal arch there for that plaza in central New York. Has the same type of spirit of clusters of American icons and statuary and the different stages of a triumphal arch. So most every community around the world has done some type of idea of celebrating the language of architecture through the idea of the system of an arch pushed back in three-dimensional space. Thank you.